He'd been riding that same dusty trail for 3 days straight when he saw it. Smoke. Not campfire smoke. Not the lazy smoke from a homesteader's chimney. This was thick, black, and angry, clawing at the sky like a dying animal. Ezekiel Zeke Morrison pulled back on the reins of his mare, Duchess. His eyes, the color of gunmetal steel, narrowed against the brutal afternoon sun. At 42 years old, Zeke had seen enough death to fill 100 lifetimes. The war had stolen his youth, and the frontier had chipped away at what was left. But this felt different. The smell hit him next. It was a vile perfume of burnt wood, burnt canvas, and something else. Something sickeningly sweet. The smell of death. His hand fell to the cold butt of the Colt, .45 holstered at his hip. It was an old reflex, a gesture as natural as breathing. Duchess snorted, her ears twitching, sensing the wrongness in the air. He nudged her forward, slowly, cautiously. The scene that unfolded was a familiar nightmare. 3 wagons, now just charred skeletons, belongings scattered across the sand like broken teeth, and bodies, so many bodies, twisted and still, left for the buzzards and the sun. Apache, he thought. Or maybe Comanche. In the end, it didn't much matter to the dead. He was about to turn away, to ride on and leave this ghost-haunted place behind. But then he heard it, a sound so faint he almost missed it. A whimper, the cry of a child. Zeke swung down from his saddle, his boots sinking into the blood-soaked sand. He moved with a quiet purpose, his eyes scanning every shadow, every piece of wreckage. The sound led him to the middle wagon, a blackened husk of what was once a family's hope. And there, huddled in its shadow, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old. Her hair was a tangled mess of brown, her little blue dress torn and stained with dirt and something darker. She was holding the hand of a woman who lay beside a wagon wheel, a woman with the same brown hair and a face frozen in a silent scream. Her mother. The little girl looked up as Zeke approached, her eyes wide with a terror that went beyond tears. "Mama won't wake up," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "I tried and I tried, but she won't wake up." Zeke stopped a few feet away, his heart a cold, hard stone in his chest. He took off his worn hat, a silent gesture of respect. The woman had been shot through the heart. There was nothing anyone could do for her. But the child was alive. In this God-forsaken land, that was a miracle. "What's your name, little one?" Zeke asked. His voice was rough from disuse, but he tried to soften it. "Evangeline," she said, her tiny fingers still clinging to her mother's cold hand. "Evangeline May Hartwell. This is my mama, Constance. We were going to California to find Papa, but the bad men came." Her voice broke, and a fresh wave of silent sobs shook her small frame. Zeke's eyes scanned the carnage again. No other survivors. The raiders had taken the horses, the food, anything of value. They left nothing behind but death and fire. It was standard practice out here, except for one thing. They almost never left a witness. So why was this little girl still breathing? Zeke pushed the thought aside. The girl was dehydrated, starving, and terrified. He needed to get her away from here. "Evangeline," he said, crouching down but keeping his distance. "You don't rush a frightened animal." "My name is Zeke. I'm going to help you. But first, you need water. When was the last time you had a drink?" She thought for a moment, her little face scrunched in concentration. "Yesterday morning, before the shooting started. A day and a half. She'd been sitting here for a day and a half, clinging to her mother, too scared to move." Zeke's jaw tightened. He walked back to Duchess, grabbed his canteen, and returned. "Here," he said, offering it to her. "Drink slow, just small sips." She let go of her mother's hand and took the canteen, drinking like a person who had forgotten what water felt like. "We can't stay here, Evangeline." Zeke said gently when she was done. It's not safe. The men who did this, they might come back. Her eyes filled with a new kind of terror. I can't leave her, she whispered, looking at her mother. She'll be all alone. Zeke felt a crack in the stone wall he'd built around his heart. He knew about being left alone. He'd lost his own wife, Martha, and his baby son, Thomas, to a fever while he was off fighting a war that nobody won. He knew what it was to come home to silence. Your mama wouldn't want you to stay here and die with her, he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. She'd want you to live, to find your papa, to be happy. It took a long time, an hour of quiet words and patient waiting. But finally, she nodded. She let him lead her away. He found a spot under a lone cottonwood tree, away from the wreckage. The ground was hard as iron, but Zeke knew how to dig graves. He'd dug too many to count. As he worked, Evangeline sat nearby, clutching a small, worn rag doll he'd found amongst the scattered belongings. She didn't cry. She just watched, her face a blank mask of shock. When it was done, he said a few simple words over the mound of dirt. He wasn't a man who prayed anymore, but it felt right. Evangeline placed a handful of wildflowers on the grave. As they walked back to his horse, she looked up at him, her blue eyes searching his face. Will you take me to Papa now? She asked. It was the question he'd been dreading. Evangeline, California is a big place. I don't know where your papa is, and I have business that takes me the other way. The hope in her eyes flickered and died. Then where will I go? That was the question, wasn't it? The nearest town was Tombstone, a hard 2-day ride south. She'd end up in an orphanage, a forgotten child lost to the system. She'd never see her father again. He looked at her tear-streaked face, at the dust and the grime, and saw something else. A flicker of strength, a resilience that reminded him of his Martha, and he heard himself say the words before he even knew he was thinking them. I reckon you'll come with me, for now, until we figure something better out. A tiny spark of light returned to her eyes. Really? You mean it? I mean it, he said, already wondering what in the hell he was getting himself into. He was a bounty hunter, a loner. He hunted men, not nannied children. But we get something straight. I ain't your papa. I'm just helping you out. Understood, she said, with a solemn nod that was far too old for her years. He rigged a small seat for her behind his saddle, and they rode away from the massacre, leaving the ghosts behind. As they crested the first ridge, Evangeline twisted around to look back. She didn't wave. She just watched until the lone cottonwood tree disappeared from view. And Zeke felt something tighten in his chest, a feeling he thought he'd buried a long, long time ago. He was headed north, toward Flagstaff. He was hunting a man, a vicious outlaw named Cole Brennan. There was a $1,000 bounty on Brennan's head, and that money was Zeke's last chance to buy back the Texas ranch his family had lost. But now, he had a new complication. A 6-year-old complication. He couldn't take her with him into a gunfight. But he couldn't just leave her. The man he was hunting, Cole Brennan, was a monster. He and his gang had cut a bloody path across the territory. They didn't leave witnesses, which brought him back to that same nagging question. Why did they leave Evangeline? That night, they made a small camp. Zeke shared his can of peaches with the girl. She ate quietly, clutching her rag doll. Tell me about your papa, Zeke said, trying to fill the silence. What's his name? Jonathan Hartwell, she said. He's tall like you, but not as scary. Zeke almost smiled. He went to California to find gold, she continued. So we could have a big house with a white porch. He was going to send for us. Another dreamer chasing a fool's promise. The West was full of them, men who left their families with good intentions and were never heard from again. Did he say where in California? Zeke asked. She scrunched up her face. Someplace with a funny name, Sacramento. Sacramento, a city teeming with thousands of prospectors. Finding one man named Jonathan Hartwell would be like finding a specific grain of sand on a riverbank. "Why'd you have to leave your home in Missouri?" Zeke asked, probing gently. Evangeline's face darkened. "Bad men came to our farm. They said Papa owed them money. Mama said it wasn't true. They said they'd hurt us if he didn't pay. That's when Mama packed the wagon. She said we had to go find Papa right away." So Jonathan Hartwell wasn't just a dreamer. He was a man on the run, running from debt, running from trouble, and he'd run right into a whole lot more. "Go to sleep, Evangeline," Zeke said, his voice softer than he intended. As she drifted off, wrapped in a blanket by the fire, Zeke sat staring into the flames. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with this picture. Raiders usually attacked at dawn or dusk, for the element of surprise. Evangeline said it happened in the morning. They were usually fast, brutal, and efficient. Why would they attack a small, poor wagon train in broad daylight? What could they have possibly been looking for? He looked over at the sleeping child. She stirred, clutching the rag doll tighter, and that's when he saw it. Around her neck, tucked beneath the collar of her grimy dress, was a thin leather cord. He hadn't noticed it before. He leaned closer, his movements slow and careful, not wanting to wake her. He gently pulled the cord out. At the end of it was a small silver locket. It was tarnished and dented, but the craftsmanship was fine. He carefully pried it open with his thumbnail. He expected to see a tiny portrait. Her mother, maybe, or her father. But it wasn't a picture. On one side there was a strange symbol etched into the silver. A serpent eating its own tail, coiled around a single jagged mountain peak. And on the other side, tucked into the tiny frame, wasn't a face. It was a small, tightly folded piece of oilskin. His fingers, clumsy and thick, struggled to unfold it. When he finally did, he held it close to the firelight. It wasn't a letter. It wasn't a note. It was a map. Or a piece of one. Just a few lines, showing a river, a cluster of rocks, and a single marked spot. Zeke stared at the map, then at the symbol of the snake and the mountain. A cold dread snaked its way down his spine. This wasn't random. The attack on the wagon train wasn't a simple robbery. They were looking for something. And he had a terrible feeling they were looking for this locket. They didn't leave Evangeline alive by accident. They just hadn't found what they were searching for. And now, he was carrying it. The next morning, the world shifted on its axis. They'd been riding for less than an hour when a cloud of dust appeared on the horizon. Cavalry. A patrol heading south. Zeke felt a moment of relief. Law and order in a lawless land. The sergeant in charge was a man named Murphy, a tough old veteran Zeke had served with during the Apache campaigns. "Zeke Morrison, by God!" Murphy called out, a grin splitting his sun-cracked face. "What devilry brings you to this part of the territory?" "Hunting Cole Brennan," Zeke replied, getting straight to the point. "You seen any sign of him?" Murphy's grin vanished. "More than sign, I'm afraid. Brennan and his gang hit the mining camp at Copper Creek 3 days ago. Killed 8 men. Made off with 2,000 in gold dust." Copper Creek. That was less than 40 miles northeast. Brennan was close. The bounty hunter and Zeke felt the familiar thrill of the chase. "Which way they headed?" "North, towards the San Francisco peaks," Murphy said. Then his eyes fell on Evangeline, hiding behind Zeke. "Zeke, this ain't a job for a man with a child in tow. Brennan's got 8 men with him now, all killers." Zeke knew he was right, but the $1,000 bounty was his only path back to a life he'd lost. "There's a mission school about 10 miles west of here," Murphy offered. "Sister Catherine runs it, takes in orphans. The girl would be safe there." Evangeline's little hand crept into his. Her grip was like a vice. "You're not going to leave me, are you?" she whispered. He looked down into those big, trusting blue eyes. For the first time in a decade, someone needed him. Not his gun, not his tracking skills, just him. The feeling was both terrifying and strangely warming. "No," he said, the word coming out before he could stop it. "I'm not leaving you." Murphy just shook his head. "Your funeral, Morrison. Brennan won't hesitate. He'd kill a child just for looking at him wrong." As the patrol rode on, Zeke sat on his horse, the world spinning. The smart play was to take her to the mission, the safe play. Hunt Brennan, get his money, and then… What? Come back for her? Leave her to be raised by strangers? He looked at the locket, which he'd tucked into his shirt pocket. The strange symbol, the map. He thought about the raiders who weren't Apaches, the ones who were still out there. Leaving her at the mission wouldn't make her safe. If they were looking for the locket, they'd find her. A mission full of nuns and orphans would be a soft target. Suddenly, his plan changed. The hunt for Cole Brennan was still on, but it had a new purpose. Flagstaff was north. He knew someone there, someone who might be able to help him figure out what this damn symbol meant. "Change of plans," he announced, turning Duchess toward Flagstaff. "We're going to find your papa." But as he said the words, he knew it was a lie. He wasn't just trying to find Jonathan Hartwell anymore. He was trying to figure out why a group of killers wanted his daughter dead. And what role Cole Brennan played in all of this. He had a feeling the two hunts were about to become one. The someone Zeke knew in Flagstaff was a woman named Rebecca Thornfield. Becca. She ran a boarding house, a respectable establishment she'd built from the ashes of a life spent singing in smoky saloons. She was sharp, she was connected, and she was one of the only people on Earth Zeke trusted. They arrived 3 days later, dusty and bone-weary. Becca's place was a splash of yellow paint and good intentions in a town built on mud and greed. She opened the door, and her green eyes widened. "Well, I'll be damned. Zeke Morrison. I was starting to think the coyotes had gotten you." Then her gaze fell on the small girl clinging to his leg. "And who is this little shadow?" "This is Evangeline," Zeke said. "We need your help, Becca." "You always need my help," she said with a wry smile, but she ushered them inside. "Get in here. You both look like you've been dragged through hell backwards." Over a hot meal of beef stew, the first real food Evangeline had eaten in days, Zeke laid out the story. He told her about the massacre, about finding the girl, about the strange silence of the raiders. He left out the part about the locket. Not yet. "So, you're looking for her father," Becca said, studying Evangeline, who was already nodding off at the table. "This Jonathan Hartwell, a prospector who ran out on his debts." "He didn't run out," Evangeline protested sleepily. "He went to make us rich." Becca's expression softened. "Of course he did, sweetheart." Later that night, after Evangeline was tucked into a soft bed upstairs, Zeke and Becca sat on the front porch with a bottle of whiskey. "She's a sweet kid," Becca said, "but you're in over your head, Zeke. You're a bounty hunter, not a father." "Don't you think I know that?" he growled, the whiskey burning a trail down his throat. "That bounty on Cole Brennan is still active, isn't it?" she asked, her eyes missing nothing. $1,000, more than enough to buy back your ranch. "More than enough," he admitted. "So why are you here, playing nursemaid to an orphan, when you should be out there hunting him?" Zeke was quiet for a long time. "Because she looked at me the way my son used to look at me, like I was some kind of hero." Becca put a hand on his arm. "Maybe it's time you started seeing yourself the way she sees you." Before he could answer, the town sheriff, Dale Hutchkins, walked up the porch steps. He was a good man, but old and tired. "Zeke," Hutchkins said, nodding a greeting to Becca. "I heard you were in town. Came to report a massacre site you found." "That's right," Zeke said. "And you brought back a survivor. A little girl." Hutchkins sighed, taking off his hat. "Brennan hit again. Stagecoach just south of town. 3 passengers dead." Zeke felt his blood run cold. "He's getting bolder. the sheriff continued. The town council has authorized me to offer you a deputy's badge, $100 plus expenses to hunt him down. The offer hung in the air. A badge. $100 on top of the $1,000 bounty. It was everything he'd been working for. His ranch, a new start. But it meant leaving Evangeline. Thanks, Sheriff, but I've got other responsibilities now, he said, his voice flat. Hutchkins glanced toward the upstairs window. I understand. The Reverend and his wife, the Pattersons, they've been looking to adopt. They'd give her a good home. Another way out. Another chance to walk away. After the sheriff left, Zeke finally pulled the locket from his pocket. He handed it to Becca without a word. She took it, her brow furrowed. She opened it, looked at the strange symbol, and then at the map. Her face went pale. Zeke, where did you get this? She whispered. It was around the girl's neck. Becca stared at the symbol, the serpent eating its own tail around a single mountain. I've seen this before, she said, her voice barely audible. A long time ago. It was the mark of a mining syndicate, a secret one. They were ruthless. They called themselves Ouroboros. The name meant nothing to Zeke. And the mountain? They say it's a lost Spanish silver mine, the Serpent's Tooth, a legend, supposedly worth millions. Suddenly the pieces started clicking into place. This wasn't about a few horses and some food. The massacre was about a lost mine. But that's not the worst part, Zeke, Becca said, her eyes filled with a new dread. The man who ran the Ouroboros syndicate in this territory. The man who used this symbol. She took a shaky breath. It was Cole Brennan. Zeke felt the porch tilt beneath him. Cole Brennan, the man he was hunting, the man who'd murdered dozens. He wasn't just an outlaw. He was tied to this. But that didn't make any sense. If Brennan was looking for the map, why would his own gang attack the wagon train? Why wouldn't he just take it himself? Unless the men who attacked the wagon train weren't Brennan's gang. Unless there was a third player in this deadly game. There's more, Zeke said, his voice grim. Evangeline's father, Jonathan Hartwell. He wasn't just a prospector running from debt. Becca looked at him, already guessing the answer. He was Brennan's partner. The words hung in the night air, cold and heavy. Jonathan Hartwell wasn't some innocent dreamer. He and Brennan were in it together. They must have found the map to the Serpent's Tooth. They must have had a falling out. Hartwell took the map, or part of it, and ran. He sent for his family, trying to escape. But Brennan, or someone else, caught up to them. Constance Hartwell must have known she was doomed. In her last moments, she hid the map, their only hope and their death warrant, around her daughter's neck. Zeke looked up at the quiet room where Evangeline was sleeping. She wasn't just an orphan he'd found by chance. She was the key. She was the target. And he was standing right between her and a man who killed for sport. Becca, he said, his voice low and urgent. Send a telegram to your contacts in Sacramento. I need to know everything you can find about Jonathan Hartwell, and I need to know it yesterday. He wasn't just hunting a bounty anymore. He was hunting a ghost, and he had a terrible feeling that ghost was leading him straight into a trap. The next few days were a blur of tension. Zeke paced the boarding house like a caged wolf, waiting. Evangeline, sensing the shift in the air, grew quiet and withdrawn, clinging to her ragdoll and her new friend, Becca. Zeke tried to teach her things, how to check the cinch on a saddle, how to read the clouds for rain, small lessons in survival. He was trying to give her tools to live, but he felt like he was just preparing her for a world that wanted her dead. The telegram from Sacramento arrived on the third morning. Becca read it aloud, her voice tight. Jonathan Hartwell was there. Worked a claim for a couple of months, known associate of a man named Cole Brennan. She paused, taking a breath. They left together about 6 weeks ago. Headed north. There was talk of a big score, a lost mine. It confirmed everything. Hartwell and Brennan were partners. But then came the twist. Another group came looking for Hartwell about a month ago, Becca read. Hard men, not locals, asked a lot of questions. They were methodical, professional. They wore plain clothes, but one of the contacts said they moved like ex-military. Not Brennan's ragged gang of outlaws, a different crew entirely. Zeke felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. So there were two groups hunting for the map. Brennan's gang, and this new, mysterious outfit. Who were they? And who did they work for? It was this second group, Zeke realized, that must have hit the wagon train. They weren't looking for gold or horses. They were looking for one specific thing. They were tidy, they were efficient, and they almost got it. Zeke, Becca said, holding up a second telegram. This one just came in. From Portland. What does it say? It's from a mining supply company. They had a Jonathan Hartwell on their books. He left a few weeks ago, owing them money. Becca's face was grim. But it says he wasn't alone. He was traveling with a woman and a child. Zeke stared at her. That's impossible. Constance and Evangeline were in Missouri. Are you sure? Becca asked gently. Could they have met up with him somewhere along the way? Zeke shook his head. Evangeline said her mama packed the wagon in Missouri after the men came looking for her papa. They traveled west to find him. So who was the woman and child with Jonathan Hartwell in Portland? The lies were piling up, one on top of the other, building a wall around the truth. Hartwell wasn't just a failed prospector. He was a thief, a liar, and what else? That afternoon, Zeke took Evangeline for a walk. The town felt like a cage. He needed open space to think. He found himself at the edge of town, near the schoolhouse. Children were playing in the yard, their laughter echoing in the clean mountain air. This is where she belonged. Safe, normal. Pretty, ain't it? Zeke turned. It was Reverend Patterson, the man the sheriff had mentioned. He was tall and kind-faced. Reverend, Zeke acknowledged. Sheriff Hutchkins told me about the little girl. A terrible tragedy, the Reverend said. My wife and I, we would be honored to take her in, to give her a Christian home. We've been praying for a child. It was the perfect solution, a safe harbor in a storm. The Pattersons were good people. They could give Evangeline a life Zeke never could, a life free of running and hiding and looking over her shoulder. He looked at Evangeline. She was watching the other children, her expression a mixture of longing and fear. I appreciate the offer, Reverend, Zeke said, the words feeling like stones in his mouth. But I have to find her father first. Of course, the Reverend said with a sad smile. But if you cannot, our door is always open. As they walked back to the boarding house, Evangeline was quiet. Miss Becca says you might not find Papa, she said, not looking at him. It might be hard, Zeke admitted. And if you can't, what happens to me? She asked, her voice small. He didn't have an answer. Would you want to keep me? The question hit him like a physical blow. He thought of his ranch in Texas, the home he'd lost. He thought of his wife and son buried under a lonely oak tree. He was a man made of ghosts and regrets. What could he possibly offer this child? It's complicated, Evangeline, he said, the words lame and hollow. Grown-ups always say that, she said, with the simple, brutal honesty of a child. When they got back, Becca was waiting on the porch, her face ashen. Zeke, she said, her voice a strained whisper. Sheriff Hutchkins was just here. Cole Brennan hit again. Where? Zeke asked, his hand instinctively going to his gun. A ranch, 20 miles east, the Miller family. Becca's voice broke. He killed them all, Zeke. The whole family, including their 2 little kids. The anger that rose in Zeke was a white-hot fire. This wasn't about a bounty anymore. This was about a rabid dog that needed to be put down. But that's not all, Becca said, handing him a piece of paper. It was a crude drawing, a sketch the sheriff had made based on a description from a neighbor who'd seen the gang riding away. It was a description of the man riding alongside Cole Brennan. The neighbor said he didn't look like the rest of the gang, Becca said. He was well-dressed, clean-shaven, rode a fine-looking horse. Zeke stared at the sketch. The face was gaunt, haunted, but unmistakable. He'd seen it before, in a faded photograph Evangeline carried in her little bundle of belongings. It was Jonathan Hartwell. Evangeline's father wasn't running from Cole Brennan. He had rejoined him. The world seemed to stop. Jonathan Hartwell, the man they were trying to rescue, was riding with the very monster who was terrorizing the territory. The father Evangeline remembered with kind eyes and a ready laugh, was a killer. He was part of the gang that had just slaughtered a family, children included. The story he'd told his wife, the story of running from debt, was a lie. He hadn't been running from Brennan, he'd been running with him. They must have had their falling out. Hartwell took the map, and now, for some reason, they were back together. What could possibly make a man rejoin the person he'd stolen from? They're heading north, Becca said, pulling Zeke from his stupor. Towards the peaks. The sheriff thinks they're going for the Serpent's Tooth mine. Of course they were. Hartwell must have made a deal, his life in exchange for his help in finding the mine. He was leading Brennan right to it. And the only thing they were missing was the key. The piece of the map tucked inside the silver locket. Zeke looked at Becca, a silent understanding passing between them. He had to go after them. He had to stop Brennan. And he had to confront Hartwell. But what about Evangeline? You can't take her, Becca said, reading his mind. It's a suicide mission. I can't leave her, Zeke shot back. Brennan knows she's the only one who might know where the locket is. And what about those other men? The professionals? They're still out there. She's not safe here. She's not safe anywhere. That night, Zeke couldn't sleep. He sat in the dark, cleaning his Colt, the motions automatic, soothing. The weight of his decision pressed down on him. He could hand Evangeline over to the Pattersons. She would be safe, loved. He could ride after Brennan, collect his bounty, and disappear. It was the smart choice, the logical choice. He walked to the door of Evangeline's room and pushed it open a crack. She was asleep, the moonlight painting a silver stripe across her face. Her rag doll was tucked under her arm. She looked so small, so fragile. He remembered her words on the porch. Would you want to keep me? He had spent years running from connection, from anything that might hurt. He had built a fortress around his heart, stone by stone. But this little girl, with her sad blue eyes and her stubborn courage, had found a crack. He made his decision. The next morning, he found Evangeline in the stable, talking to Duchess. Are you going away? She asked, her voice trembling. Zeke knelt down in front of her. No, we are going away. Her eyes widened. We are? We're going to go find that mine, he said. We're going to finish this. But, Papa, she whispered. Zeke's heart ached. How could he tell her the truth? That her father was a monster? Evangeline, he said, choosing his words carefully. Sometimes people get lost. They do bad things. It doesn't mean they didn't love you once. It was a weak comfort, but it was all he had. I'm leaving her with you, he told Becca as he saddled Duchess. Just for a few days. I'm going to scout their trail, find their camp. I'm not going in blind. And then what? Becca asked, her face etched with worry. Then I come back for her, he said, and we go get what's ours. Becca's eyes welled with tears. You're not just talking about the map, are you? Zeke looked at Evangeline, who was watching him with a mixture of fear and hope. No, he said, I'm not. He rode out of Flagstaff alone, a ghost hunting other ghosts. He left Evangeline in Becca's care, a promise hanging between them. But as he hit the trail, he noticed something. A rider, keeping his distance, silhouetted on a far ridge. He wasn't following Brennan's trail. He was following Zeke's. The professionals were here, and they were watching his every move. This wasn't just about Brennan anymore. He was caught in a crossfire, and he was walking right into the center of the storm. Zeke knew he was being followed. The shadow on the ridge was patient, professional. He wasn't one of Brennan's rough-and-tumble outlaws. This was one of the other men, the ones Becca's telegram had warned about. Zeke didn't try to shake him. A direct confrontation was a fool's game. Instead, he used his pursuer. He let the man think he was the hunter, while Zeke was the one gathering information. The way the man rode, the way he chose his vantage points, it all screamed military discipline. This wasn't a posse. This was an assassination squad. For 2 days, Zeke pushed north into the rugged country of the San Francisco peaks. The air grew thin and cold. The trail left by Brennan's gang was easy to follow. A dozen riders make a lot of noise. They were moving with an arrogant confidence, believing no one would dare follow them into their stronghold. On the 3rd day, Zeke found their camp. It was nestled in a box canyon, easily defensible, with a single way in and out. He lay on a high ridge, his spyglass pressed to his eye, and watched the scene below. There were at least 10 of them, hard-faced men, laughing and drinking around a fire, and in the center of them all was Cole Brennan. He was a big man, with a wild black beard and eyes that glittered with a cold, cruel light. And standing next to him, looking pale and nervous, was Jonathan Hartwell. Seeing him there, alive, consorting with these killers, sent a fresh wave of rage through Zeke. Hartwell wasn't a prisoner. He was a willing participant, pointing at a map spread on a barrel, gesturing toward the canyon walls. He was leading them to the prize. Zeke scanned the camp, memorizing every detail, the placement of the guards, the location of the horses. He was formulating a plan, a reckless, insane plan, to slip in during the dead of night when he saw something that made his blood run cold. Tied to a tree at the edge of the camp, away from the others, was a woman. Her clothes were torn, her face bruised. She looked terrified. Zeke focused the spyglass. It was the woman from the Portland telegram, the woman who had been traveling with Jonathan Hartwell. So Hartwell hadn't just abandoned her. He'd brought her here. He'd served her up to Brennan's crew. Why? As a hostage? A peace offering? As Zeke watched, Brennan walked over to the woman. He said something, and she shook her head violently. Brennan laughed, a horrible grating sound that carried on the wind. He backhanded her across the face, sending her reeling. Hartwell saw it. He flinched, took a half-step forward, and then stopped. He looked away, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He had made his deal with the devil, and part of the price was watching this woman suffer. Zeke felt a surge of nausea. This was the man Evangeline called Papa. He pulled back from the ridge, his mind racing. This changed everything. He couldn't just go after the map anymore. He couldn't leave that woman there. He made his way back down the mountain, moving like a phantom. The shadow was still behind him, keeping its distance. Zeke now had a new, desperate plan. He rode hard for Flagstaff, arriving well after midnight. He slipped into the back of the boarding house, waking a startled Becca. "Zeke, what happened?" "It's worse than we thought," he said, his voice a low growl. "Hartwell's with them, and they have another hostage, a woman." He explained the situation quickly, his words clipped and urgent. "We're going in," he said. "We?" Becca's eyes were wide. "Zeke, you're one man against a dozen killers." "No," he said, a grim smile touching his lips. "I'm not. I brought a friend." He told her about the shadow on the ridge. "He's been following me. He works for whoever hired Hartwell and Brennan in the first place. They want the map, but they also want to eliminate all the loose ends. That includes Brennan. That includes Hartwell. And if they find out about Evangeline, it will include her." "So, what's your plan?" Becca whispered. "I'm going to use him," Zeke said. "I'm going to set a fire and let the wolves fight amongst themselves." He then turned to her, his expression serious. "Becca, I need you to do something for me. I need you to take Evangeline to the Pattersons. Becca stared at him, her heart in her eyes. Zeke, no. It's the only way, he insisted. If I don't come back, she needs a home, a real home, not a life on the run with a broken-down bounty hunter. And what do I tell her? She asked, her voice thick with tears. Tell her her papa was a hero who died trying to save people. It's a better memory than the truth. He paused. And tell her I'm sorry. He went to Evangeline's room. He stood over her bed for a long moment, watching her sleep. He gently touched the silver locket, which she now wore openly. He opened it, took out the small oilskin map, and replaced it with a tiny folded picture of his own wife and son, the only one he had. He tucked the real map piece into his shirt. He leaned down and whispered in her ear, so softly she wouldn't wake. You're a good kid, Evangeline. You deserve the world. Then he turned and walked away, leaving the warmth of the house for the cold darkness outside. He didn't look back. He rode back towards the peaks, but this time he wasn't sneaking. He rode with a purpose. He found the shadow, the professional, waiting on the same ridge. Zeke dismounted and walked towards him, his hands empty and open. The man was tall, dressed in dark, practical clothing. He had the cold, dead eyes of a killer. He held a Winchester rifle, aimed squarely at Zeke's chest. You've been following me, Zeke said, his voice calm. I have my orders, the man replied, his voice flat and emotionless. Your orders are to clean up a mess, Zeke said, to eliminate Cole Brennan and Jonathan Hartwell, and to recover a certain map. The man's eyes narrowed slightly. Brennan has the map, Zeke lied. He took it off Hartwell. He's planning to double-cross your employer. He's going to take the silver and disappear. He was planting a seed of doubt, turning his enemy's weapon back on them. Brennan's in a box canyon, a perfect kill zone, Zeke continued. You and your men could take them all out, but it would be a bloody fight. You'd lose people. What's your point, Morrison? My point, Zeke said, is that I can get you inside. I can create a diversion. While they're distracted, your team can move in and take them down. Clean, efficient, just the way you like it. And what do you get out of it? The man asked, his suspicion palpable. I get Brennan. The bounty on his head is mine, Zeke said. And there's a woman in that camp, an innocent hostage. I want her out, alive. The man considered it for a long moment. It was a good deal. Zeke was offering to be the goat, to walk into the lion's den and stir up chaos, allowing the real hunters to pick them off. How do I know I can trust you? The man asked. You don't, Zeke said. But you also know Brennan can't be trusted. Right now, I'm the best chance you have of getting what you want without starting a small war. The man finally lowered his rifle. My name is Cutler, he said. We move in at dawn. The plan was set. Cutler and his team of 4 other professionals would position themselves on the canyon rim. Zeke would go in alone, under the pretense of wanting to join Brennan's gang. His job was to get close to Hartwell and the female hostage, and at the first opportunity, cause a massive distraction. As dawn broke, casting long, eerie shadows across the canyon, Zeke rode in. He was met by 2 of Brennan's men, their rifles leveled at him. I'm here to see Brennan, Zeke announced. The name's Morrison. I hear he's looking for good men. They led him into the camp. The place stank of stale whiskey and fear. Brennan was sitting by the fire, a plate of greasy bacon in his hand. He looked up as Zeke approached, his eyes appraising, predatory. Morrison, Brennan grunted. I know the name. You're a bounty man. I was, Zeke said. I found it's more profitable to be on the other side of the law. Brennan chuckled. And what makes you think I'd trust a man who used to hunt people like me? Because I brought you a gift, Zeke said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It wasn't the map. It was the deputy's badge Sheriff Hutchkins had offered him. He threw it into the dirt at Brennan's feet. I'm tired of working for pennies while men like you get rich. He saw Jonathan Hartwell standing nearby, his face a mask of terror. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Zeke saw no recognition, only fear. Brennan seemed to buy it. He was arrogant enough to believe any man would want to join him. "All right, Morrison, you can stick around, but you make one wrong move, and my men will use you for target practice." Zeke nodded, his eyes scanning the camp. The woman was still tied to the tree. She looked weaker, more defeated. He had to act fast. His opportunity came an hour later. Brennan and Hartwell were arguing over the map, their voices rising. Most of the gang was gathered around, listening. It was the perfect moment. Zeke casually walked over to the supply wagon. He accidentally knocked over a lantern. It shattered near a pile of oily rags and, more importantly, a crate of dynamite. The fire caught instantly. "Fire!" Zeke yelled. The camp exploded into chaos. Men scrambled for water, yelling and cursing. In the confusion, Zeke sprinted towards the woman. He sliced through her ropes with his knife. "Come on!" he yelled, pulling her to her feet. At the same moment, the first shot rang out from the canyon rim. Cutler's team had opened fire. Brennan's men were caught completely by surprise, pinned down between the fire and the snipers on the ridge. It was a slaughter. Zeke used the chaos as cover, pulling the woman toward the horses. But Brennan saw him. "Morrison!" he bellowed, his face contorted with rage. He realized he'd been tricked. He raised his pistol, ignoring the bullets whizzing past his head. But before he could fire, another figure stepped into his path. It was Jonathan Hartwell. "No!" Hartwell screamed, a wild, desperate look in his eyes. He launched himself at Brennan, not with a gun, but with his bare hands. It was a futile, suicidal gesture. Brennan fired once, a deafening blast. Hartwell crumpled to the ground, a dark stain spreading across his chest. But his sacrifice had bought Zeke the 2 seconds he needed. Zeke shoved the woman onto Duchess's back, swung himself into the saddle, and spurred the horse into a gallop, riding straight out of that fiery hell. Behind them, the sounds of the gunfight raged. He didn't look back. He rode until the sounds faded, until the canyon was just a bad memory. He found a sheltered cove and finally stopped, his lungs burning. The woman slid off the horse, shaking. "Thank you," she whispered. He was going to... They were all... "What's your name?" Zeke asked. "Sarah," she said. "Sarah, why were you with Hartwell? Who are you?" She looked at him, her eyes filled with a grief so profound it was terrifying. "I'm not who he said I was," she said, her voice cracking. "He told Brennan I was just some girl he'd picked up, a nobody." She took a shaky breath, the truth spilling out of her in a torrent of pain. "Jonathan Hartwell was my husband, and Evangeline is not his daughter." The world stopped. "What?" Zeke breathed, the words stolen from his lungs. "My name is Sarah Hartwell," she choked out. "The woman who died in the wagon train. Constance. She was my sister, and Evangeline is my daughter." Zeke stared at her, his mind refusing to process the words. Evangeline wasn't Jonathan's daughter. She was Sarah's. And Constance, the woman in the grave, was her aunt. "Jonathan. He was always chasing schemes," Sarah explained, the story tumbling out. "He got involved with Brennan and this Ouroboros business. They found the location of the mine, but they needed a key to decipher the last part of the map. The key was an old family heirloom of ours, the locket. He stole it. He and Brennan were going to split the silver, but Jonathan got greedy. He stole the full map and the locket and ran. He sent a telegram to my sister Constance telling her to meet him in Arizona with Evangeline. He knew Brennan would come after me, so he used my own sister and my own daughter as decoys. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it was staggering. Hartwell had set up his own family to die, to create a false trail while he and Sarah escaped to Portland. But Brennan's reach is long, Sarah wept. He found us. He took me hostage, forced Jonathan to come back and help him. Jonathan told him that Constance had the locket, that she was his wife. He sacrificed them to save his own skin. Zeke felt sick. The woman he'd buried, the mother he'd mourned for Evangeline, was her aunt, an aunt who had died to protect her. And the father Evangeline longed for was a monster who had used her as bait. He thought of the little girl, safe with Becca, waiting for him, waiting for news of a father who never was. "There's one more thing," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The men who hit the wagon train. They weren't Brennan's. They were from Ouroboros, from the man Brennan and Jonathan stole from in the first place. He wants the map, and he wants everyone who knows about it dead." "Who is he?" Zeke demanded. "I don't know his name," she said, "but Jonathan called him the Railroad Man. He's powerful. He owns politicians. He owns the law." Zeke looked back in the direction of the canyon. Cutler and his men weren't just there to kill Brennan. They were there to sanitize the entire operation. And now, there were only two loose ends left: him and a little girl in Flagstaff. "We have to go," Zeke said, his voice grim. "Right now." He pulled Sarah onto the horse, and they rode for Flagstaff, not as rescuers, but as fugitives. The hunt wasn't over. It had just begun. And the real monster wasn't Cole Brennan. He was still out there, hiding behind a veil of respectability, and his faceless killers were closing in. When they got back to Flagstaff, the town was buzzing. Sheriff Hutchkins met them on the street, his face a mixture of awe and relief. "Zeke, we heard the shooting clear from here. A patrol found the canyon. It's a massacre. Brennan, his whole gang, they're all dead. And we found Jonathan Hartwell's body." "What about Cutler and his men?" Zeke asked quietly. "Cutler?" the sheriff asked, confused. "There was no one else there, just Brennan's crew. Looks like they had a falling out and shot each other to pieces." Zeke's blood ran cold. Cutler's team had done their job and vanished. They were professionals, ghosts. They had erased themselves from the scene, leaving a story the law would easily accept. He pushed past the sheriff and ran to the boarding house. Becca met him at the door, her face pale with worry. "Zeke, is it over?" "No," he said, pushing Sarah gently inside. "It's just getting started." He turned to Becca, his eyes wild. "Where is she? Where's Evangeline?" I couldn't do it, Zeke," Becca confessed, her voice trembling. "I couldn't give her to the Pattersons. She's upstairs. She's been asking for you." A wave of relief, so powerful it almost buckled his knees, washed over him. He took the stairs two at a time and burst into her room. Evangeline was sitting on her bed, clutching the locket. She looked up, and her face broke into a radiant smile. "Zeke, you came back!" She ran and threw her arms around his legs, burying her face in his trousers. He rested a hand on her head, the weight of the world on his shoulders. How could he ever tell her the truth? Downstairs, he explained everything to Becca, while Sarah wept silently in a corner. The story was a tangled nightmare of betrayal and greed. "So this railroad man is still out there," Becca said, her voice grim. "And his killers know you were at the canyon. They'll be coming for you, for all of you." "I know," Zeke said. He looked at the map piece in his hand, the key to a fortune in silver. It was a curse. "There's only one way to end this. I have to use this to draw him out, to finish it on my own terms." Suddenly Sarah stood up. "The mine," she said. "The serpent's tooth. It's not just silver." Zeke and Becca looked at her. "Jonathan was always bragging," she said, wiping her eyes. "He said the silver was just a bonus. He said the real treasure was in the mine's office. A ledger. The railroad man used the mine for more than just silver. He used it to launder money, to bribe officials. The ledger has names, dates, amounts. It's proof of everything. It's enough to bring down his entire empire." That was the real prize. That's why Ouroboros was so desperate to sanitize the situation. It wasn't about lost silver. It was about exposure. Zeke's mind raced. He now had the ultimate leverage. "Becca, I need a fresh horse and supplies," he said. "And I need you to get Sarah and Evangeline out of town. Take them somewhere safe, somewhere no one would think to look." "Where will you go?" Becca asked. "I'm going to the Serpent's Tooth," he said. "I'm going to get that ledger, and then I'm going to burn their whole world down." As he prepared to leave, Evangeline found him in the stable. "Are you leaving again?" she asked, her lip trembling. He knelt down in front of her. "Just for a little while. I have to go take care of the last of the bad men." "My papa," she whispered. Is he with Mama now?" Zeke's heart broke. He thought of the lie he'd told Becca to tell her, but looking into her innocent eyes, he couldn't do it. She deserved a better memory. "Yes," Zeke said, his voice thick. "He is. And he was very brave. He helped me save a lot of people." It was a kinder lie, a necessary one. He then took the locket from her neck. He opened it, removed the picture of his own family, and carefully put the oilskin map piece back inside. "I need to borrow this," he said gently. "It's the key to making sure the bad men can never hurt anyone again. I'll bring it back to you, I promise." She nodded, her eyes full of trust. "Be safe, Zeke." "Always," he said. He rode out of Flagstaff under the cover of darkness, a lone rider against a secret empire. He was no longer just a bounty hunter. He was a man with a purpose. He was fighting for the memory of a good woman named Constance, for the future of a traumatized one named Sarah, and for the soul of a little girl who saw a hero in a broken man. He was riding into the serpent's mouth, and he was ready for a fight. The journey to the Serpent's Tooth was a descent into a harsher, more primal land. Zeke pushed Duchess hard, leaving the familiar trails for the high, desolate country marked on the map. He moved only at night, resting during the day in hidden ravines, knowing Cutler's men were hunting him. He was the fox, and the hounds were closing in. The map led him to a narrow, wind-swept pass between two jagged peaks that looked like a serpent's fangs. At the end of the pass was a cliff face, a sheer wall of rock. There was nothing there. No mine entrance, no sign of human activity. For a moment, Zeke felt a pang of despair. Had it all been a wild goose chase? Then he remembered the locket, the symbol, the serpent eating its own tail, coiled around a single peak. He looked at the fangs of rock above him. One peak was slightly taller, more prominent. He studied the cliff face below that peak. He ran his hands over the cold stone, searching for a seam, a crack, anything. He found it behind a curtain of ancient petrified vines, a set of heavy iron-bound doors, rusted shut and almost invisible against the rock. There was no lock, no handle, just a small, circular indentation in the center of the doors. It was the exact size of the locket. He took a deep breath and pressed the locket into the indentation. There was a low groan of grinding stone, and the massive doors slowly swung inward, revealing a black, gaping maw. The air that rushed out was stale, cold, and smelled of earth and secrets. He lit a lantern and stepped inside. The main tunnel was wide, shored up with thick timber beams. Tracks for ore carts led deeper into the darkness. He followed them for what felt like a mile, his footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. Finally, the tunnel opened into a massive cavern. His lantern light danced off the walls, and he gasped. It wasn't just silver. It was a river of it. Great veins of pure, glittering metal running through the quartz, shining like a captured constellation. It was a fortune beyond imagining. But he wasn't here for the silver. On the far side of the cavern was a small, crudely built office. The door was unlocked. Inside, a thick layer of dust covered everything. A desk, a chair, a shelf of geological samples, and on the desk sat a heavy, leather-bound book. The ledger. He opened it. The pages were filled with neat, precise columns of script. Names, dates, shipments of silver that were never recorded, payments to judges, senators, army colonels. It was a detailed account of a decade of corruption, a cancer that reached the highest levels of the territory. And at the top of several pages, a name appeared again and again. The signature of the man who approved the transactions. Governor Ashton, the territorial governor himself, the man who had put the bounty on Brennan's head to clean up his own mess. The railroad man. Zeke had him. He had it all. He was about to take the ledger and leave when he heard a sound from the tunnel, a footstep. He doused his lantern, plunging the office into darkness, and drew his Colt. He flattened himself against the wall, his heart pounding. A beam of light sliced through the doorway. It was Cutler. "Morrison!" Cutler called out, his voice echoing in the vast cavern. "I know you're in here. The governor is a reasonable man. He wants to make a deal." Zeke remained silent. "The girl is safe," Cutler continued. "For now. But my men are with your friend, the boarding house owner. They are all being watched. You walk out of here with that ledger and they all die." It was a checkmate. Zeke had the proof, but if he used it, Evangeline and Becca would pay the price. "What's the deal, Cutler?" Zeke called back, his voice tight. "You give me the ledger. You walk out of this mine and disappear forever. The governor will provide you with enough money to live comfortably anywhere in the world. You forget you ever knew the names Hartwell, Brennan, or Ashton. In return, the girl and the women live." It was a tempting offer, a life of peace, safety for the people he cared about. But it wasn't justice. It was a deal with the devil. Governor Ashton would continue his reign of corruption, untouchable. The deaths of Constance, Hartwell, and dozens of others would mean nothing. Zeke thought of Evangeline. What kind of world would she grow up in? One where monsters in fine suits got away with murder? No. "There's no deal, Cutler," Zeke yelled. He fired a shot into the darkness, not at Cutler, but at a stack of old, rotting timbers near the office. Then he lit his last match and tossed it onto the dusty floor, where a small puddle of oil from his lantern had spilled. The fire caught with a whoosh. Cutler cursed and dove for cover as flames began to lick up the dry wood of the office. "You're a fool, Morrison!" Cutler screamed over the roar of the fire. "You'll burn in here with it." "Maybe," Zeke yelled back, "but I'm taking you all with me." He scooped up the ledger, wrapped it in his jacket, and bolted from the office, heading not for the main tunnel, but for a smaller, darker passage he'd noticed earlier. The fire spread with terrifying speed, the old timbers igniting like kindling. The cavern began to fill with thick, choking smoke. The immense heat caused the rock to groan and shift. The whole mine was becoming an inferno. Zeke scrambled through the side tunnel, praying it led somewhere. Behind him, he could hear the sound of collapsing rock as the main tunnel began to give way. Cutler was trapped. The tunnel twisted and turned, and Zeke's lantern had gone out. He was running blind, one hand on the wall, the other clutching the precious ledger. The air was getting thinner. His lungs were on fire. Just as he was about to collapse, he saw it. A faint glimmer of light ahead. He stumbled forward and burst out into the night air, collapsing on a narrow ledge high up on the cliff face. He was alive. He was out. He looked down. The main entrance to the mine was gone, buried under 1,000 tons of rock. The serpent's tooth had sealed its secrets, entombing Cutler and the river of silver forever. But Zeke had the real treasure. He had the truth. He didn't go back to Flagstaff. It was too dangerous. Instead, he rode east to the territorial capital. He walked into the offices of the Territorial Clarion, the one newspaper Governor Ashton didn't own. He handed the scorched, water-damaged ledger to the editor, a wiry, ink-stained man with honest eyes. "Print it," Zeke said. "Print it all." The story was an explosion. The ledger's contents, published in a special edition, sent shockwaves through the territory. Governor Ashton was exposed. The corruption was laid bare for all to see. Federal marshals arrived with arrest warrants. The governor's empire crumbled to dust. In the ensuing chaos, Zeke Morrison slipped away. 2 months later, a rider approached a small, newly repaired ranch in the hill country of Texas. Green shoots were pushing up in the fields, and a fresh coat of white paint gleamed on the house. Becca Thornfield was on the porch, hanging laundry. She looked up, and a wide smile broke across her face. "Took you long enough," she said. From inside the house, a little girl came running out. "Zeke!" Evangeline launched herself into his arms. He lifted her up, holding her tight. She was healthier, happier. Her eyes were bright. "I promised I'd come back," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And you brought my locket," she said, touching the silver that now hung around his neck. He took it off and placed it back where it belonged, around hers. Later that evening, as the sun set over his land, his home, Zeke sat on the porch swing. Becca was on one side of him, and Evangeline was curled up on the other, fast asleep. Sarah, her sister, had chosen to move back east to start over, finally free from the ghosts of her past. But Becca had sold her boarding house, saying she was tired of the dust of Arizona. "You did it, Zeke," Becca said softly. "You got your ranch back. You got justice." The bounty on Brennan had been paid, and a reward for bringing down the governor had quietly been added. He was a rich man, but that wasn't what mattered. He looked at the sleeping child beside him, her head resting on his shoulder. He thought of the long, bloody road that had brought him here. He was no longer a ghost, no longer a man running from his past. He was home. He was a father. He had finally learned how to live again. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of justice and redemption from the forgotten corners of history. And let us know in the comments, what do you think is the true meaning of family?